Everyone has a fix for immigration. Build the wall, hire more judges, open the border, close them down. But while we're all arguing about slogans, almost no one is talking about the most important questions. And that is, what does a fix actually look like on paper? Today, we're going to stop arguing about headlines and examine a real, comprehensive immigration proposal. Not because it's perfect, not because I think it's the one Congress would eventually pass, but because it's much easier to understand immigration when we are talking about an actual proposal instead of arguing about abstract ideas. Before we begin, I want to make something very, very clear. This bill isn't perfect, and it's not necessarily what would eventually become law. But it is one of the best roadmaps we have for understanding how all these moving parts would eventually fit together. So let's see what's inside. Because it's comprehensive, it attempts to address nearly every major issue we've spent the last 4 videos discussing. So it makes a good starting point. Not deciding whether immigration reform is good or bad, but for understanding what comprehensive reform would actually look like. The first thing I noticed wasn't any single policy, it was the scope. This proposal isn't trying to solve just one problem. It's trying to solve all of them. It looks at legal immigration, the border, the asylum system, interior enforcement, border security, people who have been here for years and are already part of our community, agricultural workers, trafficking, immigration courts, and even making sure that the people running the system are actually accountable for how they do their jobs. Right away, that should sound familiar because over the last 4 videos, we've learned that immigration isn't one problem, it's a system. And this proposal treats it like one. But making a list of problems is the easy part. The hard part is figuring out how to solve them without creating new ones somewhere else. And that's exactly where this proposal starts getting interesting. Because once these solutions begin to interact with each other, they don't always pull in the same direction. You can already see that in how this proposal approaches the border. So let's take a look. Now, fair warning, this is the part where most people's eyes glaze over. Not everybody wants to spend hours looking at 500 pages of some policy proposal. There are dozens of sections and enough legal language to make anybody's head spin. But if you stick with me, I'll make it easy. Because if you understand the next 4 categories, you will understand about 90% of the arguments people have about immigration. So let's stop looking at the stack of paper and start looking at it as 4 big moves to fix the system. I think that's a lot easier to understand. Now let's take them one at a time. The first thing we discover is that immigration isn't one system. It's a collection of different systems trying to do different jobs. That's why this proposal begins by trying to make the legal system work better. The first move isn't about increasing or decreasing immigrants. It's about making the legal system work better. Instead of fixed visa slots, the proposal wants to adjust as conditions change. It tries to reduce year-long backlogs It speeds up family reunification. It creates new ways for employers to fill jobs that are difficult to staff. Now, whether you agree with those ideas or not, the goals are pretty clear. Make the legal system faster, more flexible, and more responsive to what today's needs are. Earlier in the series, we asked what the border is actually supposed to accomplish. This proposal answers that question very differently than many people would suspect. The second move focuses on the border. One thing I found interesting is what isn't here. Instead of proposing miles of new wall, the proposal puts most of its attention on technology and personnel, infrastructure maintenance, and speeding up legal crossing points of entry. It also tries to process asylum claims much faster through dedicated asylum courts and regional processing centers. The underlying idea seems to be that the border works best when it's both secure and efficient. Whether that balance is entirely possible or not is another question entirely. Hey, but before we continue, let me take a moment to thank everyone who has been following this series. If you're new here, welcome. Pull up a chair, grab a cup of coffee, and let's talk policies. If you enjoy thoughtful conversation, or if you really just appreciate what I do, like the video, share the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment. It helps people find the channel. And actually, it's one of the last free things we have left. And as always, you'll find a PDF of the proposals in the description below. Now, looking at how this proposal approaches the legal system and the border, let's turn our attention to what it does once the people are here. We also spent time looking at why enforcement creates so much controversy. Here, the proposal isn't asking whether enforcement should exist. It's asking what enforcement should look like. The third move shifts away from asking whether immigration laws should be enforced and starts asking how they should be enforced. Remember the 2-year-old? The proposal prioritizes recent unlawful arrivals, serious criminals, frauds, and national security threats. At the same time, it adds due process protections, family notification requirements, body cameras, and stricter accountability standards. In other words, it's trying to make enforcement focus while also making it more transparent. One of the hardest questions we've looked at is what to do about people who have built their lives here over many years. This proposal finally has to answer that question. The fourth move deals with one of the most difficult parts of immigration. What do you do about people who have been living here for years and are already part of our communities? The proposal creates different pathways for different groups: dreamers, long-term undocumented residents, agricultural workers, essential workforce personnel, parents of U.S. citizen children. Each pathway has different requirements: taxes, background checks, time in country, learning to speak English, taking a civics class. Again, whether those requirements are too strict or too lenient is a debate for another day. But the proposal is trying to answer a question that Congress has struggled with for decades. All right, we're done. Thanks for sticking with me. That's actually why I wanted to break it down into 4 moves instead of 9 tiers or 100 pages. Once you see the big picture, the rest of the proposal starts to make a lot more sense. And now, if we just step back for a moment and notice what just happened, we didn't spend the last few minutes reading a bill. We looked at the problems, we looked at one proposal's attempt to solve them, and that's a very different way of thinking about immigration. Instead of asking, do I like this policy? We first asked, what problems is it trying to solve? Once you understand that, the rest of the conversation starts to make a lot more sense. Understanding the proposal isn't the hard part, evaluating it is. Because every one of these solutions creates a trade-off somewhere. Each priority pushes another priority into the background. Every compromise makes someone happy, and it frustrates somebody else. But there is one compromise that usually kills a bill before it even gets to a vote. And that's, how much does it cost? One final thought. If Congress passed a major legislation reform, it would never look exactly like this one. It would go through legislative changes, compromises are made, entire sections would probably be rewritten. That's simply how the legislative process works. But that's not really why we looked at the proposal. We looked at it because it gives us something concrete to talk about. Because it's much easier to have an honest conversation about immigration when we're discussing an actual proposal instead of arguing about an imaginary one. But there's one thing, again, that every proposal has to pass, and that's the price tag. So that's where we're going to go next week. We're going to look at exactly what this would cost. And not only that, but we're going to actually look at where the money would come from. So this is not in Kansas anymore, and I hope to see you in 1 week for the next video. Goodbye for now.